Finally, folks, we're getting a new Lumix L-mount camera very soon. At least that's what lrumors.com is reporting. Now, there's no name for this camera yet. That's going to be released tomorrow, supposedly. And this is, again, supposedly 100% confirmed by L Rumors that there is, in fact, a new Lumix L-mount camera coming. We know Leica has a L-mount camera coming, the SLS3. That'll be kind of a cheaper, lower resolution version of the Leica SL3, which is, probably out of the price point of most people. I don't know that many people excited about the Leica cameras. Obviously, there's a loyal fan base there. There's enthusiasm, don't get me wrong. But I think just general population, there's probably more people interested in something from Lumix, even though that market is also quite small compared to Sony and Canon and even Nikon these days. There's just a lot of enthusiasm around these other bigger brands, and Lumix, has its little sweet spot that I love, you probably love if you're watching this channel. And so I think no matter what this camera is, if it's an L-mount camera from Lumix, that is something to be excited about. Is it an S1 Mark II? Fingers crossed, hopefully. I think more people would be interested in S1H Mark II. Is it an S1R Mark II? Is it something completely different? Is it a S3 or an S4? We already got the S9. We got the S5. Is it an S7? Who can say for sure? But if it's from Lumix and it's an L mount, it's something to pay attention to and be excited about, if it is actually coming very soon. We know that we've got some Panasonic registrations in China for, I think, 2 or 3 new cameras coming. There's no indication of what those cameras will be, but they are registered in China. So there's something on the horizon. It's been a long time for the S1, the flagship L-mount cameras. Those have been 6 years. They've been kind of, around, and obviously they don't have the modern features like phase detect. So any refresh update for the S1 line would certainly involve that. I can imagine phase detect, actually good performing autofocus in video. That was the Lumix Achilles heel for the longest time. Just the depth from defocus, autofocus system, just never working properly in video, at least not to the way that you would want in competition with Sony and Canon and everyone else who embrace phase detect. So we finally have that now on some of the newer Lumix cameras. Obviously, it's on Micro Four Thirds. It's on full frame with the S cameras, like the S5 Mark II, the S9, both have great autofocus in video. So that would definitely, I would assume, would come with whatever this new camera is. I can't imagine going backwards to depth from defocus still. So more advancements in autofocus, probably. I would guess we'd also be seeing uncropped 4K 60. That's the other big pain point for the full frame Lumix cameras. That 4K 60 is cropped, at least on the S9 and the S5 Mark II. It's a sticking point. It's a pain point. A lot of people want to shoot. If they buy a full frame camera, they want full frame in all the modes. Just like, it used to be we had 10-bit in certain modes and 8-bit in others, and it was like, no. We're getting 10-bit across the board. I think we need to kind of move away from this cropping for the frame rates sort of situation. There's plenty of other cameras that are doing it. So uncropped 4K 60 would be kind of a no-brainer, an obvious addition to the Lumix L-mount lineup. What else? Obviously, there's the hopes and dreams of all the cool things they could do, like 32-bit float internal. That would be awesome for video. You've got, my biggest fingers crossed for an internal ND system. I think the DJI Ronin 4D actually has internal ND filters on that kind of gimbal-like camera. As I was doing some more research around DJI and the 4D, it turns out that has internal ND filters. So it's definitely possible. You got things like the Sony FX6 that have a mirrorless mount that have built-in NDs. So it's possible. I don't know if it's quite possible in the tiniest of form factors, but there's some examples out there in the market that kind of show, yes, it's possible. But I'm not going to get my hopes up. I'm not going to, that's not going to be the hill to die on. What else is realistic in a Lumix L-mount camera? What's the obvious upgrade? And I really don't know, besides just more resolution, 6K, 8K. That's kind of the hot ticket these days, where everyone's comparing, still, you might have your particular preference for a camera, and at the end of the day it becomes kind of arguing about the specs. Well, this one does 8K 60, well, yours only does 4K 60 cropped. And for me, there's some validity to that argument. There is a need for more resolution, but it's diminishing returns, really. I've been doing some testing lately, as you've probably seen, where you can upscale 1080p to 4K, you can do 4K to 8K, you can do all sorts of just natively, just exporting, right? Just uploading an 8K file or uploading a 6K file from 4K stuff. But then you also have AI upscaling as well in your editing suite, depending on what you're using. So there's lots of ways to kind of get more resolution, even though it's not native. Obviously, that is the best case scenario, but file sizes get larger. Is it necessary all the time? Maybe yes, maybe no. But also people are watching on their phones, and the demands for resolution are not nearly what they once were across the board for the general shooter. There was a time where I would argue that, weddings should be shot in 4K. And that's probably one of the more popular avenues for videographers, photographers, just production in general. Weddings seem to be kind of the bread and butter for a lot of people out there. And to shoot them in 1080p, my wedding, I had to shoot in 1080p. Unfortunately, that was the only cameras I had back then when I got married. And it's fine, but I wish it had been 4K. And I think there's an easy argument for that. But do weddings need to be shot in 8K? I don't know. Maybe there's some value to that. But I think 4K is certainly sufficient for the most part. So arguing about resolution is valid, but it's kind of like, all right, whatever. So as long as the specs match close enough across the board, I mean, the crop factor is certainly a bigger one. 4K 60 cropped is a bigger pain point than the difference between 6K and 8K, in my opinion. Maybe you disagree. Obviously, there's always the people who will point out the niche use cases of, well, if you're doing visual effects, you need the most resolution. Or if you're doing spatial video or VR, you need the most resolution. And I agree with that wholeheartedly. But again, general public, mass consumption of the things you're buying, the regular shopping trends on Amazon or B&H, what gets the most buys is not those niche fringe use case scenarios. So if you can offer a consumer, prosumer, professional style camera at an affordable price point, and it happens to have 8K 60 or 8K 30, that's great. I don't think I'm not going to complain about that, but I'm also not going to put my hat I'll put all my chips on the camera that shoots 8K 30 or 8K 60 if it doesn't do all the other things that I need it to do, like shutter angle, like open gate, like being easy to use, having a button layout that makes sense, having a menu that makes sense. I've talked about this recently as well, where I just think the user experience, the user interface is becoming more and more important as far as loyalty, as far as what are the purchases you or I may want to make. I'm not always after the highest spec camera. I'm after the one that gets the job done. And this happened a long time in photography, and it's now catching up, I think, on the video cinema filmmaking side of the equation, because for the longest time video was so limited. We weren't even shooting 1080p, and the moment we got that, it was like clinging on to 1080p despite the aliasing, despite the moire, despite everything that was wrong with the quote unquote 1080p back in the day. And then same thing with 4K, clinging to that, dealing with 8-bit and compressed files and all this nonsense just for that, like the actual resolution we needed. Photographers had the luxury of, high megapixel counts a long time ago. And it really came down to what's the camera that's going to get the job done? What's the one that's easy to use? What has all the features I need? I remember a long time ago in my career, I was doing some photo editing for a wedding company. And their choice at the time was not about megapixels or dynamic range or autofocusing or anything like that. It was just the handful of tools and features on certain models. I believe it was Nikon cameras at the time. That was their preference, where you could, reviewing a photo, you had a certain sequence of button presses that allowed you to check your critical focus. And that was kind of the big selling point for them at the time. Like just making sure that I'm in focus and that my files aren't too big, but they're sharp enough for print. There's always the unique circumstances for any individual, whether you're doing photo or video. Probably for you, you have your preferences too. And a lot of it comes down to that user experience. For photographers, there's plenty of people who are still shooting with the 5D Mark III, the 5D Mark IV, maybe even the 5D Mark II, because it just gets the job done from a photography standpoint. And yes, there are always the latest and greatest features, and the newer stuff is, technically better, but often it is diminishing returns, and you end up favoring the things you like that feel comfortable, that are easy to use. So as long as that is maintained through the upgraded specs, I think that's where you find those perfect cameras, the things that give you the latest and greatest in technology, but also don't remove too many of the user features in terms of functionality, because that can happen quite often, especially on the software side of the equation. Plenty of times, applications will be updated for the latest and greatest in technology, but something is sacrificed along the way. So for me, this year, next year, and for the future, that's the side of the equation that I'm looking at the most. Is it easy to use? Is it intuitive? Is it comfortable? Is it convenient? Does it speed up my workflow beyond just, okay, does it shoot 8K, 12K, 16K? Yes, that is valid. And in certain situations or circumstances, you may value ultimate resolution or ultimate dynamic range or ultimate frame rate capabilities. But as a general purpose, as a camera that I'm going to use for, pretty much everything I'm doing, I don't want it to come with those sacrifices or compromises in just terms of usability. And for me, the Lumix cameras have been some of the most usable. I really enjoy shooting with them. I think the buttons and the menus and all of it just kind of makes sense. That definitely comes with experience, but also the Sony cameras and those buttons and those menus I find to be far more tedious, even though I have equal access to both systems, Lumix or Sony. And so you are just at the end of the day picking your preference. And that's why I am excited about a new Lumix L-mount camera, because I think no matter what it is, it'll offer something new and unique, as Lumix tends to do. And is it the best of the best? Is it the top tier? Is it the highest spec camera? Sometimes, but it also doesn't have to be. We've got the S5 Mark II, which is great. The S9 I really enjoy. And now I think if something new is on the horizon, if it is a refresh of the S1 lineup or something totally, completely new, I'm excited either way to see what that is, because there's so much potential in what Lumix has done. And I still think there's so much room for them to grow. They could release way more cameras, and maybe there's a business plan for them on their side of it where that just doesn't make sense. You don't want to flood the market with too many models, and you're going to get the overwhelmed, like, well, which one do I even get? I kind of see that trend with some other camera companies. So it is nice to have things dripped out in moderation, but also I think the pace has been a little too slow for most people. A lot of people have switched systems, and you'll see the people who left Lumix, but at the same time, there's people switching from Sony and Canon to Lumix. So it's really just a game of make good products, release them at a decent interval so you keep people kind of coming back for more, I guess, because technology advances so quickly that the moment 6 years go by, it's feeling like almost twice that long. It almost feels like 12 years, considering just how fast these things move and how much has been gained in just the last 5 years and in the last 3 years. The Canon R5 already has the R5 Mark II version out there, which seems like that, even the R5 doesn't seem that long ago when it came out. And now we've got the Mark II. So pushing things forward, keeping things fresh, keeping them interesting, keeping them exciting, I think is what gets people excited about things like the L-mount and in wanting to invest in those lenses. But then obviously we need more of those lenses, more options, which I've also talked plenty about, just needing more general purpose lenses, more telephoto lenses, more pancake options. The L-mount is pretty good for like generic lenses. You've got your 24-70, your 28-70, you got your 70-200. It has the kind of the bases covered in terms of just regular stuff you might need. Primes, certainly, they're out there, but there's none of the super expensive wow factor lenses. There's not a lot of even cheaper, more affordable, versatile lenses. And there are some, don't get me wrong, but there can always be more, right? There can always just be more out there like what the E-mount has. But again, it's been around for so long that it's a little easier to have more under your belt when you have that much legacy behind you. So I'm hopeful that this new Lumix L-mount camera will do something interesting, do something good. If not, no worries. You don't have to buy it. That's the great thing about products. You can just look at them and say, that one's not for me. Or you can see something great and that could significantly change your workflow, speed you up. That's usually the stuff I'm looking for. Efficiency, output. Does it make my life easier? Because at the end of the day, that's what I want the tool to do. I want it to make my life easier. I want it to let me do things I couldn't do before, rather than just, oh, it's got a little bit more resolution, or oh, it's got a little bit more dynamic range, or oh, now we've got a different, SD card slot support system, whatever. Oh, now we have random, just like the random little stuff they put in there. That's like, yeah, that's nice to have, but that doesn't change anything. I'm looking for the features that make my life easier, simpler, faster, cheaper, all of the above. That's what I look for in the tools that I buy for the work that I do, because that's kind of what I value the most, probably. Streamlining things. You have AI now streamlining all parts of the industry and across the board. It's a whole shakeup with AI, because a lot of it is about efficiency, speed, just making life faster, getting a job done quicker. So if that's happening on the software side, I think the hardware needs to keep up as well. And we'll see very soon whatever this new Lumix L-mount camera actually is.